like to call this meeting of Lakewood City Council for Monday, July 15th to order. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Barth has been excused. Councilmember Boki. Present. Councilmember Brandstetter. Here. Councilmember Moss has been excused. Councilmember Simpson. Here. Deputy Mayor Whalen. Present. Mayor Anderson.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Now, would you all please rise with me in a moment of silence in honor of our men and women serving overseas, followed by the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We now move to proclamations and presentations, and the first item of business in that category is police commissioning. Chief Zarro.
Thank you, Mayor Anderson. Once again, it's my pleasure to bring forward 3 new officers and a newly promoted sergeant for their swearing in. Mr. Mayor, I appreciate you volunteering to do the swearing in this time. I'll call them up one at a time and say a few words about each one, and then we'll do the swearing in as a group. First, if we could have Sergeant Jason Catlett come forward. Jason started with us in 2006 and has distinguished himself as just an outstanding officer and a narcotics investigator. And one of the unique things about this promotion, I've talked to you all about sort of the transition from new to old, is he is our first promotion that was not an original hire with the police department in 2004 or 5. So that transition continues, and I'm proud to be able to make Jason that first sergeant. So next, if I could have Jared Pingle come forward. Jared is a lateral officer that's coming to us from Steilacoom. He actually grew up in this area, and one of the things that I learned about Jared is one of the early homicides that we had here in Lakewood, the victim, it was a domestic violence homicide, the victim was the mother of a high school friend of his, and he said that was one of the motivating factors for him to get into law enforcement. And it's interesting to hear that for all the tragedies that we deal with, sometimes those can actually motivate people to serve, and I think it's an outstanding motivation for service, and we welcome Jared to the department. And I should note too that the first person to tell me that he was applying for a department from Steilacoom was Chief Rodriguez from Steilacoom, and he went on and on about what a good catch he'd be if he made it through the process. So welcome, Jared. Next, Officer Stephen Moffitt. Stephen is our entry-level, one of our 2 entry-level officers, comes to us from the Department of Corrections, and I can't tell you how many people from different agencies that worked with him that pulled me aside when they heard he was applying with us and said, he is a great catch. He will be an outstanding addition to your department. And these are people that don't give recommendations lightly. So bringing him on board and getting him through the process, I think we're very excited to do so and prove all the people right. And then last, Jasmine Wright Curley. Jasmine is our second entry-level officer. She has a much different background than most police applicants, and most recently is a dance instructor, a children's dance instructor. And I talked to her about this. She's going to find that authoritative voice that she uses for kids is going to come in very handy on the street, because that's a lot of times that's some of the same mentality. It's also worth noting that she pointed out that one of our council members, Mr. Simpson, was her favorite history teacher when she was in school. And I told her that's because he was there for most of it. And he was an eyewitness, so he was able to just relay stories. So welcome, Jasmine. And to all of you, we really appreciate what you're going to do for us here at the department, and we look forward to a promising future. So with that, I'll have Mayor Anderson come forward for the swearing in. I said before, family members, if you don't have a good vantage point, if you want to come forward and get pictures now, please do so.
And we'll have an opportunity afterwards for pictures with your family here with council. So if you'd raise your right hand and repeat after me. I state your name.
do solemnly swear that I am a citizen of the United States and of the state of Washington, that I will support the Constitution and laws of the United States, the Constitution and the laws of the state of Washington, and the laws of the city of Lakewood, and will do my best to, it's my fault. I will do the best of my I will do the best of my judgment and will to the best of my judgment. There we go. I'm not very good at grammar or seeing. And will do the best, and will to the best of my judgment, skill and ability, truly, faithfully, diligently, and impartially perform the duties of the office of police officer or sergeant in and for the city of Lakewood and Pierce County, Washington, as such duties are prescribed by law. Congratulations. So, council, would you come down and take a photograph with the new officers?
We can do those later. No, that's good. These are more.
Got everybody? So now we move to a proclamation declaring July 27th, 2019 as Pierce County Trails Day. I invite Mr. Larry Levine of the Forever Green Trails organization to the podium with Councilmember Simpson.
I see Chief Zarro has left. And here I had a history lesson all prepared. So, we won't go into that, but I am pleased to present this proclamation. And I say that because I'm one of those who on weekends will put 25 pounds on my back and go 15 miles on trails. So this, I am very pleased to be able to read this. Whereas interest in outdoor recreation along trails, including walking, hiking, cycling, horseback riding, birding, and mountain biking, is on the rise with Lakewood and Pierce County residents, visitors, and tourists. And whereas trails in Lakewood and Pierce County enhance the quality of life for our citizens, improve public health outcomes, increase tourism opportunities via outdoor recreation, and provide an alternative mode of transportation for jobs, work, and play. And whereas creating safe access to open space through a connected system of urban and non-motorized trails is a major element in the Lakewood Legacy Plan and the Non-Motorized Transportation Plan, and whereas completion of the Tahoma to Tacoma Regional Trail Network will result in 9.6 million additional miles of bike usage annually and 9.3 million additional miles walked annually, translating into $1.4 million in total health care savings, and will help 31,000 new residents engage in healthy walking and biking activities. And whereas the City of Lakewood has joined together with other Pierce County jurisdictions to create events that encourage citizens to celebrate the value and enhanced quality of life that trails bring to our communities, promotes trail awareness, and establishes an ethic of and participation in public trail use and stewardship. And whereas the City of Lakewood is committed to enhancing our trail system and is celebrating Pierce County Trail Day by hosting walking and stewardship events along the trails in Fort Steilacoom Park and at Ward's Lake Park. Now, therefore, the Lakewood City Council do hereby proclaim July 27th, 2019 as Pierce County Trails Day in the City of Lakewood, and urge all citizens to support this event by visiting, using, beautifying, and protecting our trails. Proclaimed this 15th day of July, 2019, Don Anderson, Mayor. And here is the proclamation. And would you like to say some words?
I just wanted to thank the City Council and, of course, your staff as well. They're excellent partners in working with Forever Green Trails as we do our advocacy work for trails and community livability, not just in Lakewood, but across the county. It's just a pleasure to have understanding and support of council. So I thank you, and I do encourage folks there to participate. There are several events, as mentioned, a couple also nearby in Chambers Creek Canyon, but the ones in Ward Lake and Fort Steilacoom Park. Family-friendly stuff, biking, walking, even a skateboard push from Puyallup to Tacoma, believe it or not. And there's a whole wide variety of events for all kinds of skill levels and folks all over the county. So thank you very much, and we hope to see you out there on our trails on Saturday, July 27th. Thank you.
Thank you. Come on down. me, or is it beeping? We now move to the public comment section of our agenda. This is when any member of the public may speak to any item of interest to the city, whether or not it is on the agenda. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. The yellow light will come on at 30-second warning and a red light when your time is up. Please identify yourself by name and city of residence, such as Mary Moss, Lakewood, Washington. First person who signed up is Mr. Dennis Haugen.
Dennis Haugen, Lakewood, Washington. I was frustrated with the way with the information on the wall. Some reporters, of course, don't even recognize we have a problem on the border. And other reporters that are good just don't get into enough depth. So there's Fisher Industries I called out there. It's the guy that seems to be the most favored for the wall is Fisher Industries out of Dickinson, North Dakota, and Tempe, Arizona. And there's numbers in there, and those numbers are important to me, and they make a lot of sense. In this case, a private group raised the money. They bought the land. It's on the border, and they're going to sell it to the federal government for $1. And part of this was to show how fast they could go, how their process worked. And they did about 2,300 feet in about 3 or 4 days over Memorial Day. And there's a whole lot more videos that can keep explaining more and more of the numbers. After all, it's math that's important. And how does it fit into a system? How can they use it? It's fiber optic cables, so they can tell when somebody's crossing the border. And if you're in open country, it's easy if you've got a reference point to start from. Now watch those lights come on. And this is in rough country. Now we got a little note here on U.S. Attorney General William Barr. He's entertaining them. Yeah, he's playing the bagpipes. This is before a meeting in which he talked to all U.S. attorneys across the United States that are involved with the federal government. I believe he knows the difference between legal and illegal. And I think he'll be a great leader.
I'm Kathy Hargrave with Sitz and Hill Engineers in Tacoma, Washington, and I represent Nielsen Pacific, or the Holroyd Company. And I am speaking tonight in response for public comment regarding CPA ZOA 2019-02 Bridgeport. And I will be reading from the document that I've just laid before you. The Community and Economic Development Department added information to that which was presented for the July 1st, 2019 public hearing for council consideration, beginning on page 125, which is a excerpt, your first attachment, in the City Council agenda packet regarding the applicant's requested zoning and comprehensive plan map amendments for parcels 022-026-2057 and 022-026-3153. The substance of the added information revolves around the following. CEDD recommended NC/NC2 for the parcels in question, not only due to the current NC2 zoning across from Bridgeport Way and the fact that C2 is currently used exclusively within the South Tacoma Way Center of Local Importance, but also because Lakewood's C2 zone is where the city has authorized placement of level 4 and 5 group homes. Please see the South Tacoma Way Center of Local Importance map, which is your second attachment. Please see the Lakewood zoning map with I2 and C2 zones labeled and outlined in black, third attachment. Please note the C2 zone is also present outside of the South Tacoma Way Center of Local Importance. There is a large area zoned C2 on the north and south sides of South 84th Street, west of Interstate 5 right-of-way. There are also two small parcels zoned C2 that are indicated on your map excerpt. There is only one area that is zoned Industrial 2 in the city of Lakewood. Industrial 2 represents the highest intensity of industrial use, which is your fourth attachment, allowed within the city. That property is currently used as heavy industrial by both Mutual Materials and Nielsen Pacific. The neighborhood commercial 2 NC2 zone allows for a broad range. I'm speaking for an entire group, so I would like to be indulged. There's three of us. Okay.
What's the group and who's here from the group?
Nielsen Pacific, I have Stephen Nielsen here, and I also have Jeff Kraft. I
Okay.
won't need their
Okay,
entire
thank you.
time. So the applicant intends to continue the heavy industrial uses on the property to the east of the parcels in question into the indefinite future. The NC2 zoning district is not compatible with the I2 zoning that will remain to the east. The applicant does not want the potential for any future development that could allow for residential, apartment, or condominium uses as a neighbor. This situation, in their opinion, would lead to complaints against the industrial users. The intended use of the properties, which precipitated the application to rezone them, includes drive-through restaurants and convenience commercial. These uses are permitted outright in the C2 zone, but require an administrative use permit in the NC2 zone. The uses that we're proposing are appropriate to the character of the surrounding neighborhood and would provide a buffer between the adjacent NC2 zone properties and the I2 use, which will remain into the foreseeable future. There is no intention of having any type of residential development on the Bridgeport Way parcels under consideration for zoning and comprehensive plan map amendments, including group homes. No deed restriction is required on the properties. Once the properties are redeveloped with restaurants and convenience commercial, they typically will remain developed as such for the life of the structures, and that would be approximately 40 years. There is no equivalent zoning circumstance within the city of Lakewood where the rezoning of the parcels in question to C2 sets a precedent, as there are no other heavy industrial I2 zoned areas within the city. Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, members of the council, thank you very much for your consideration of our request to rezone the properties to C2.
Thank you. That's all the people who have signed up for public comment. If anyone else is interested, please step forward to the mic and queue up at this time so we don't do it one by one if there's more than one of you. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Deputy Mayor, and City Council members. For the record, my name is Wayne Carlson with AHBL, and I'm here this evening representing the Clover Park School District, and just here today to encourage you to support the comprehensive plan amendment for Woodbrook that is identified as 2019-03. We've had, we're really pleased with the staff report and support we've had through this to reclassify this from a public institution to light industry. And so we implore you to show that same support and amend the comprehensive plan so that the school district ultimately can, sell the property. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to make public comment? Is there anyone else who wishes to speak at public comment? If so, please come forward. Seeing none, I declare public comment closed. We now move to the consent agenda. Madam Clerk.
A, approval of the minutes of the City Council study session of June 24th, 2019. B, approval of the minutes of the City Council meeting of July 1st, 2019. C, motion number 2019-41, authorizing the execution of an interlocal agreement with the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services in the amount of $621,000 relative to the Western State Hospital Community Partnership Program. D, motion number 2019-42, authorizing the execution of an interlocal agreement with the Washington State Department of Social and Health Services in the amount of $90,000 relative to the Western State Hospital Police Protection Program. E, motion number 2019-43, appointing Carol Ray Dotson to serve on the Public Safety Advisory Committee through August 6, 2022. F, motion number 2019-44, appointing Brandon Worth to serve on the Community Services Advisory Board through December 15, 2022. G, resolution number 2019-16, confirming and approving the special assessment role for the American Lake Management District Number 1. H, resolution number 2019-17, setting September 3rd, 2019 as the date for a public hearing to consider the vacation of a portion of 87th Street Southwest right-of-way between Durango Street Southwest and the Sound Transit Rail Line. I, items filed in the office of the city clerk. 1, Landmarks and Heritage Advisory Board meeting minutes of May 23rd, 2019, and 2, Parks and Recreation Advisory Board meeting minutes of May 28th, 2019.
Thank you. Is there any item which any member of the council wishes to have removed from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved, Mr. Mayor.
It's been moved by Mr. Simpson, seconded by Ms. Moss, that we adopt the consent agenda. Is there any further questions or comments? All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. We now move to the regular agenda ordinances. Ordinance number 713, Madam Clerk.
Ordinance number 713, renewing interim controls initially adopted on January 22nd, 2019 for wireless service facilities.
For this, we have Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, Tiffany Spear from the Community and Economic Development Department. As the city clerk just mentioned, this is a renewal of the emergency ordinance that was passed by council in January. It's an extension theoretically for another 6 months, but I don't think it will be that long. This is because Title 18A is where the new permanent language is going to be wrapped into for council consideration later this fall. So this is verbatim the ordinance that you adopted earlier in the year regarding small wireless facilities, or 5G is what it's commonly called. And the request from the staff is that you, and the Planning Commission also recommended that you go ahead and adopt this now as the interim.
Any questions for Ms. Spear? Entertain a motion. It's been moved by Ms. Moss, seconded by Mr. Brandstetter, that we adopt ordinance number 713. Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, will all in favor please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. We now move to ordinance number 714. Madam Clerk.
Ordinance number 714, adopting amendments to the Lakewood Comprehensive Plan, including future land use map and zoning map, and the Lakewood Municipal Code Title 18A.
Ms. Spear.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Tiffany Spear one more time with the Community and Economic Development Department. This topic starts on page 124 of your packet, and it is a summary one more time of the various amendments that have been included in the docket for this year, and there's also an ordinance number 714 in there for your consideration this evening. This is the docket for the 2019 Comprehensive Plan amendments. There are map and then text and zoning amendments included within the package. There was a public hearing held by the City Council on July 1st, and comments were received that evening as well as earlier by the Planning Commission. This is the evening that is scheduled for potential action by the council. Trying to see if there's anything throughout. If we jump just right to the ordinance itself on page 131, there's one Scrivener error to point out and maybe request that the council would do an oral amendment to fix it. It's in the third line of the third whereas clause on page 131. It says no more frequently that once every year. That would just need to be the word than, if that's acceptable to council. And then based on the conversations that have been had so far, a number of the amendments within, as they're drafted within this ordinance for council, should you be ready to take action tonight, some amendment will be needed for this ordinance to be ready to go. So for instance, 2019-01 related to the Tillicum rezone proposal, it was requested by the applicant to rezone a number of parcels. That was recommend deny by staff and then also recommend deny by the Planning Commission. As it sits right now, the way it's written, it would go ahead and do what the applicant requested. So if the council were to decide to deny that application, there would need to be an amendment made to do so. The amendment number 2, the Bridgeport and 3 parcels involved in that, this is again one that was slightly different in its history than just recommending approval or denial all the way across. The applicants for 2 of the parcels, you heard testimony about that this evening, we were requesting corridor commercial and then commercial 2 on 2 parcels. Those 2 were recommended to be rezoned and redesignated as neighborhood commercial, NC2 as the zone by staff. And then Planning Commission recommends that the council take action and approve it as the applicant requested, which again is corridor commercial, commercial 2. So depending on the council's decision, that may or may not need an amendment. Jumping over to page 135 of your packet, you'll see amendment number 2019-06. This relates to the Springbrook neighborhood. And there are, again, a number of things that happened in the history of this amendment. This came forward as a request initially by council to rezone a number of parcels within the Springbrook neighborhood as industrial. Staff did not provide Planning Commission a specific recommendation, but instead provided 4 options to the commission to consider. And the recommendation that came from Planning Commission was option 1, or status quo, or take no action, because information had been provided by the Public Works Director regarding an ongoing analysis of the floodway and floodplain in that area, which wouldn't be completed in time to fully inform this packet. So if the council were to go with the recommendation from Planning Commission, it would need to amend to say option 1 or take no action. Alternatively, if the council wanted to totally withdraw this application and leave it for a future cycle, that would be an alternative action that the council could take. The final application tonight that is pending some change in this draft ordinance would be number 7, which is related to military districts. This was one that Councilmember Brandstetter came and met with staff on about a week ago and had a number of requested amendments, and I'll go through those briefly in the PowerPoint in just a moment. But if any of those were to be incorporated, that would require also amendments to the draft ordinance. So other than that, the packet again moves through each of the descriptions of each of those proposed amendments that have been talked about in several council sessions now, starting on page 138. There was also a memo provided to council electronically on July 11th or 12th, related again to the Springbrook neighborhood, and I believe the council has already reviewed that, so I won't spend time on that. There is a second staff memo, which is for you on page 251 of your packet, and this is focused again on the military districts, that 2019/07, related to some of the discussion that was had with Councilmember Brandstetter.
So have you had a chance to analyze Councilmember Branstetter's proposed amendments to the extent you can explain them to us?
Sure, and I'll jump right to that if that's the pleasure of the council.
215.
If you jump to page 260 of your packet, there were changes from Councilmember Branstetter related to several of the, or excuse me, one policy in the comprehensive plan, Land Use Policy 34.2, and there was a proposed amendment to subsection E of that, and then as drafted as in response to his request, there's a new proposed subsection F. So that's on page 261. Subsection E is, there's a section that's highlighted within that on page 261. That's what would be added per the request from Mr. Branstetter if that gets brought forward as an amendment. And both E and F here are related to the idea of moving forward with the idea that the Air Corridor 1 and 2, as well as the clear zone, need to have the appropriate uses and densities in order to comply with military compatibility information and recommendations out of the ACUS study, most recently from December 2015. So in E, you'll see that second sentence there, and then F is talking about converting existing higher density housing, to less density or less intensive land uses over time. The rest of the underlined and red language in this section are already proposed amendments in the package that you had in front of you prior to Mr. Branstetter's requested changes. If you then go to page 263, you'll see in a subsection B on that page, also highlighted, a request to change B1 under the CZ zoning district or clear zone zoning district. There's an elimination of the first sentence, which is continuation of uses already legally existing. And then there's the addition of language referring to maintenance and repair in compliance with Lakewood Municipal Code 18A02.A35 through A870. And essentially, this is saying these would now become non-conforming uses within the clear zone. The same proposed amendment is also included under C1 regarding Air Corridor 1 properties, and D1, the Air Corridor 2 properties. And looking at what this would actually do, you'll see, hopefully on your screen, if I didn't just mess everyone up by jumping to this, within Air Corridor 1, there are currently 553 dwelling units in that zone, and then in Air Corridor 2, there are 1,218. And if you move across to the right in the various last 5 or 6 columns there of that table, you'll see, for instance, in AC1, 230 apartment units, 50 duplexes, 236 mobile homes, and 37 single-family homes. In Air Corridor 2, it's a slightly different mix. There's more apartments, fewer duplexes, more mobile homes, considerably more single-family units, and then several triplexes and RVs. So put those two zones together, and if these amendments were to go forward, that would result in about 1,770 residential units being changed from legally existing to non-conforming within the city with these amendments. There has been no public notice of this proposed change, so none of these property owners are aware of this conversation this evening. So if this, again, were to go forward, then that's just something for the council to be aware of. Coming back to subsection B then on page 263 of your packet, under B2, there is a change proposed to eliminate primary permitted uses in the open space and recreation zone 1 within the clear zone, and that same amendment again is in AC1 and AC2 in subsections C and D of this part of the code. So what this is doing is taking the active recreation allowed uses in the open space and recreation 1 zone out of Air Corridor 1, Air Corridor 2, and clear zone. The third set of amendments within this part of the code that Mr. Branstetter was requesting some consideration of staff is under C2 and then D2. And that is, I believe, it may be actually a Scrivener's correction, I'm not sure. But the way it's currently written under AC1, you'll see their primary permitted uses in the I2 zone. So this is a less intense zone allowing more intense uses. And then you'll see in D, the opposite, where you have AC2 allowing I1. So the intention here is to bring the allowed uses from the industrial zones 1 and 2 into more conformance with AC1 and AC2, if that wasn't too confusingly said. And then the last thing that are being suggested changes are on page 265. This is 18A30.750, conditional uses. It's the same idea. It's again reconciling AC1 and I1 in subsection C, and then AC2 and I2 in subsection D.
Did I understand you correctly that that amendment would, one element of that amendment would remove passive recreation from AC2?
The intention is that it would allow the passive, it would take out the active. I'm sorry if I said that wrong.
Okay, well, I understood it wrong.
Okay. Yeah, the intention is to take out OSR 1, which is more of the active, and keep OSR 2, which is the passive.
And what's our distinction, what's our definitional distinction there between active and passive?
Mr. View, I think will be able to answer, but maybe he'll be able to answer.
Golf cart versus
A good
walking.
example would be if you wanted to build a community center or some sort of cultural facility in one of those zones that had brought in a higher intensity of people, the desire was to keep those kinds of activities out of the air corridor zone altogether. So this would be open space, would be more passive, which would be trails, picnic areas, things that you would normally see in Fort Steilacoom Park, minus things that would bring in high-intensity groups of individuals. So for example, the pavilion would not be allowed in the more specific or higher density because we're going to run into the people per square foot or per square acre requirement.
Thank you.
So as that ordinance is put in your packet, then none of these amendments have been included. These would all be something that would need to be affirmatively brought forward and considered by council as you consider the ordinance and whether to take action this evening. So unless there's any other questions of me, I stand ready to step out of your way.
Any questions? Mr. Branstad.
Just a formatting question, and I'm on page 134. And one of the actions that you mentioned might be a potential amendment was the 2019-01, the map amendment for telecom.
Yes.
And I was just wondering why the paragraphs were numbered 5 and 6.
I honestly couldn't tell you, sir, and it's the same in 02. That just must have been a
And on
formatting
number
problem.
2, and then in all the others where there are paragraphs, they are numbered beginning with 1. Okay.
That's the way they all should have been. I apologize. I'm not sure how that happened.
Okay. So I'm just wondering, you get that scripted there, so that if we were to move an amendment to number 1 and we were to say, and where we were going to do that, would the amendment, if we did not want to grant the applicant's request, would the appropriate amendment be to strike CPA ZOA 2019-01 from the ordinance, or would we be amending one of these paragraphs?
I would suggest striking it from the ordinance, because what this is saying under your now therefore section, you do ordain as follows. If you remove one that you want to deny, it's simply not going to be there anymore. It'll be taken out, unless the
Okay.
city attorney has a different opinion.
And then you spoke about number 2, where it wasn't necessarily they were going to deny, but we may or may not want to change it from the applicant's request. If we were going to change it from the applicant's request, then we would be amending paragraphs there, but they would be renumbered 1 and 2 and could make any changes that we wanted to if the council wanted to.
Correct. And the way those two paragraphs are reading right now, they are consistent with the Planning Commission recommendation, which is in turn consistent with what the applicants originally requested. So the CC and the C2 are in there for those two parcels in question. If you were to want to do something different, then there'd need to be an amendment.
Understand. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So are there any other current questions for Ms. Spear? I ask you to hang tight because I'm sure we'll have some as we go along. The way I intend to walk through this, because it is complicated, is to entertain a motion and a second for the comprehensive plan as drafted, and then move down on those 5 issues, which I have as and any other amendments, but take the potential amendments to 1, 2, 6, 7, and Mr. Branstadter's suggestions in order, and then take any other amendment that any council member may have. And there doesn't necessarily have to be an amendment on those, but I just walk through so we can either somebody move for an amendment or we'll exclude it as we go down. Understand? All right. So I'd entertain a motion on the ordinance.
Move adoption of ordinance 714.
Seconded.
Been moved by Mr. Branstadter, seconded by Mr. Simpson, that we adopt ordinance number 714. Now, with respect to the consideration of the amendments, is there any desire to amend the recommendation, amend the ordinance with respect to number 1, the Tillicum amendment? If this is not amended, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Spear, if this is not amended, the applicant's request would be approved.
Correct.
Mr. Branstadter.
I would move to amend the ordinance to strike CPA GOA 2019-01 and that amendment from the ordinance.
Is there a second to the amendment? Is there a second to the amendment? Seconded by Mr. Bulkey, moved by Mr. Branstadter, that we strike the amendment 2019-01, which is the Tillicum map amendment. A discussion. Branstadter, your amendment.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, the request here is for a collection of parcels that are in the vicinity of the new interchange that's going on and being built, that's under construction and will be for some time in Tillicum, in the vicinity of the Madigan. The request is to rezone some residential properties that are now going to be at the intersection of where the exit from I-5 comes into the community of Tillicum. And the request is to rezone it as neighborhood commercial, which is the zoning that exists along Union Avenue. Neighborhood commercial is essentially a zoning that provides a great haphazard group of uses, okay? It contributes to sprawl, it's a run of thing. And I think that at a newly developed freeway interchange, there is probably a range of commercial uses that would be the highest and best use of that would become apparent once the interchange is actually open, done, and operating. And neighborhood commercial is not the zoning that would get us to the typical and the ideal things. For instance, this wouldn't include lodging, for instance, or things like that. I think that it's better to deny this, that this property and when this becomes developed and we see what is in the best economic interests of the city, of that area of the community, it would be better to consider it at a future time for a more appropriate zoning classification.
Mr. Bulkey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Spear, could you tell us what they could do in neighborhood commercial to NC2, which was the original request, correct?
Please bear with me, I'll be able to answer that, I think. If you look on page 149 of your packet, you'll see the list of uses that are allowed outright, comparing R3 to NC2, which is what was requested. And it is a wide range. There's residential uses, government administration facilities, outdoor recreation, religious assembly, postal, transportation, utilities, amusement and recreation, convenience commercial, eating and drinking establishment, various levels, personal services, food stores, professional offices, rental and repair, general merchandise sales, printing and publishing, and then accessory uses.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Is there any further discussion? See, my concern here is it's tempting for us to determine what the market will determine is the best use for that. And but if it's not changed, it's a relative certainty that this is locked in as a R3, a decaying residential area that someone has assembled, has no intention of improving as a residential area and where people don't necessarily want to live at the end of a freeway off-ramp. It is adjacent to similar zoning, NBD. We didn't pick it, but fate has decided where the freeway off-ramp is going to be, and that's particularly valuable commercial property, if it's zoned correctly. So I have some concerns that somebody may want to substantially improve what is there now, and that we will miss the economic cycle boat if we don't approve the change. So.
And they just want to go to NC2 and not C2.
Correct. So there's no further discussion. Vote on the amendment to remove 2019-01 from the ordinance. All in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Nay.
The amendment fails. We now, moving down the list, take a look at 2019-2 as it stands. The ordinance would effect the owner applicant's request for designation of the Bridgeport property as C2.
Correct.
That will stand without an amendment. Does anyone wish to make an amendment to the ordinance with respect to 2019-02? Hearing none, we will move to consideration of an amendment or potential amendment to 2019-06 Springbrook property. As it stands, the ordinance would redesignate the parcels to IBP and remove the Lakewood Station boundary located in the Springbrook neighborhood. The current recommendation of staff is to take no action at this time due to developing information with respect to floodplain. Is that correct?
Correct, and that information is expected to be finalized by September, October.
So that would take an amendment.
We have to do something affirmative.
Yes.
We would need an amendment to remove 2019-06 to maintain the status quo, correct?
Yes.
I'm confused.
So, well, we don't have an amendment yet, so.
No. I'd entertain an amendment to 2019-06 to remove it. Does anybody wish to make that amendment? That would preserve the status quo. Hearing none, we'll move on to.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor. We're on 2019-06, and the status quo would be to, not amending that, would rezone all those parcels to industrial and industrial business.
The zoning would remain as it is today. The recommendation, the ordinance contains a redesignation.
Correct.
The updated recommendation of staff is to remove this element of the ordinance to maintain today's zoning as the status quo until there's further information.
My understanding was to agree with staff, we have to amend the ordinance.
Correct.
Correct.
To remove 2019-06.
So are you looking for a motion to?
Yes.
Okay, so I will move to remove CPA ZOA 2019-06 from the ordinance.
I will,
Been moved by Mr. Brandstetter, seconded by Mr. Simpson, that we remove amendment 2019-06 from the ordinance. Mr. Bulkey.
so I do have some questions and want to speak to this, since I was the guy that kind of made noise about the patchwork of zoning we've got in an area, and the fact that we're allowing high-density residential in a flood zone, which is now a flood zone today, which is very odd, and in my mind, and not all that, not what we should be doing. And so this is predicated, this amendment is predicated that we're going to get some type of relief. We're betting that we're going to get some type of relief on the flood map that we've approved, that we are now in the process, and feel free to correct me after I'm done here.
Sure.
So the goal of this amendment is we take this off, we go to the status quo, which is currently this patchwork of zoning. And then we wait, and we're going through a process now to try to get some relief from the old flood, the new flood,
The current.
the current, thank you, the current flood map, which we approved a year or two ago.
Correct.
Which is much more aggressive than the old flood map, which put a ton of this area in the north part of Springbrook now into flood zone, making a lot of this property almost unbuildable or very expensive to build in. So the idea of waiting is that by the time the next comp plan process comes around, we'll have some relief on this map or some changes on the map that will then allow us to rezone this area the way we think it should be rezoned, based upon the results of this new map.
Yes, Mr. Boki, and what you had provided to you on July 11th was a memo from Mr. Buer stating that some preliminary information has come back. It's not finalized. And so the recommendation was to withdraw this amendment in order to allow that report to be finalized, and that would be brought to the council once it was done, perhaps with the 2020 comp plan package. You would then be able to consider this fully informed.
Okay, so are we looking for any, all, or none? I mean, we're expecting the federal government to say, go away, the original map that you approved a year ago is the map for the rest of your life until we tell you another one? Or, yes, you win, we're not going to make any of it? Or is it possible they could take portions and remove it?
Okay. The original intent of doing the flood study and hiring a consultant to take a look at this area was comments from our Public Works Director was he thought that the map was overstating the potential flood areas.
Okay.
Okay. So that was the basis for doing that. Late last week, we received some preliminary indication that was just the opposite, that potentially what was coming forward as new information was actually having a more significant effect on flooding within the area. Now, this is all preliminary information. And so I wish, that the goal here for us at the staff level is to make sure the council is informed. And I do not wish to withhold this information from the council and later come back and say, oh, but. So the idea would be if the council wants to not take action on this amendment, we will come back in September and October with more information for you to take a look at, and then I anticipate you will give us further direction for a 2020 amendment for this area. The opposite, if you want to continue with the industrial business designation, you can do that as well. But if you do that, when you take a look at this new information, you may have to come back and change it again. So it's really at the council's discretion.
Given the uncertainty of the maps and what we would do, should we consider a moratorium on building in that area?
You can build in that area currently, provided that you comply with the current floodplain overlay regulations. And there have been proposals that have been submitted that do comply with those regulations. And what that has meant is that your total building area, your lot coverage, is basically 35%. So the rest of the property remains parking lots or open space where you are containing potential floodwaters. Okay, if you're doing industrial development, you want 90% lot coverage. And so if we're looking at this kind of new information, it's going to frustrate that attempt, and so therefore the size of the industrial development would be much smaller than what maybe the council was expecting. I'm not here to recommend a moratorium at this time. You can develop in the area, and you are doing substantial set-aside into open space.
Thanks.
Any other discussion on, now I forget the status of this. We have a motion and a second on the amendment to remove. Number 2019-06, which would maintain the status quo. Is there any further discussion? All in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The amendment carries. We now move to consideration of text amendment 2019-07. Excuse me. Is there any interest in amending this by council? Mr. Branstadter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have several amendments with it that are internal to this, but first I would like to move to amend the comprehensive plan text that relates to land use policy 34 in such that one, in land use policy 34, the word exhibit be changed to figure to just more accurately reflect the current structure of the comprehensive plan. And that land use 34-2 subparagraph E be amended to read existing industrial uses in the Air Corridor 1, but outside of the clear zone, and Air Corridor 2 zones are to be preserved, and industrial uses that complement aviation facilities are encouraged, and the siting of warehousing, storage, open space, and other appropriate land uses within the Air Corridor are encouraged. And to add a new subparagraph F that says, promote the conversion of existing higher density housing, including mobile home parks and apartments and other high occupancies, to less intensive land uses. And then to re-letter the remaining paragraphs of policies within that section.
I'll second that for discussion.
Okay, it's been moved by Mr. Brandstetter to amend, is that 34 in 2019-07, second by Mr. Bulkey. Further discussion? Mr. Brandstetter.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. This is to align the policies that we have stated in the comprehensive plan with our actions and rhetoric of what we were really looking to say, that we're going to comply with the JLUs and the types of things that we are looking to have in the air corridor zoning. We essentially, it says we want to encourage the industrial uses that are mentioned in the proposed rewording of subparagraph of E, and we want to work to reduce the density and the presence of high residential uses, as mentioned in the proposed new policy paragraph F. This is consistent with discussions that we have had internally. It's also consistent with discussions that we've had with the
191.
with the regional elements about saying that we don't believe that our population growth should be predicated upon residential growth and uses in those areas. And so putting this policy in the comprehensive plan makes our rhetoric and position into those organizations consistent, being able to go and do that. And we've had any number of times of when we've had discussions here on the dais about where the vision for, in the long term, of where we're looking to do. And we had the JLUs that talks about the direction that we should move the air corridors to. And this is a policy statement that is looked to align with those conversations and the JLUs.
Members of the council, if you want to look to where this language is discussed explicitly in your packet, pages 260 to 261, you'll see the language referred to by Mr. Brandstetter in Land Use Policy 34.
Who's at 191?
And there's a number of sections and sentences that are already in red line. Strike out the areas that are highlighted in yellow. Those are the specific amendments that have been raised so far by Mr. Brandstetter.
E and F.
Correct.
That's more easy. So is staff find any inconsistencies with this proposed policy statement and the remainder of the ordinance?
No.
Mr. Bulkey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So all we're voting on here is what's on page 261, paragraphs E and F.
The parts that are highlighted, yes. Everything else is the existing language that you see in the last couple of meetings through the public hearing, everything. It's just the highlighted stuff that's new.
So in E, we're adding the siting of warehousing, storage, open space, and other appropriate land uses within the air corridor areas are encouraged.
Correct.
And promote the conversion of existing higher density houses, including mobile home parks and apartments and other high occupancies to less intensive land uses.
That is a policy that actually was in the comprehensive plan in prior versions. It was removed when the discussion was had with Mr. Brandstetter, and the motivation behind doing this was to become as compliant as possible with the joint land use study and the ACUs. This language was brought back as a suggestion for council to consider.
Any further discussion or questions? All in favor of the amendments proposed by Councilmember Brandstetter, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The amendment carries. There's more, I understand. Mr. Brandstetter.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now I'd like to move to an amendment of Title 18A 3730. And I would move that in subparagraph B, subparagraph C, and subparagraph D, that the first paragraph be changed to read, maintenance and repair of existing structures shall be permitted in compliance with Lakewood Municipal Code 18A02 835- through 870.
Non-conforming, I think. I'll second.
Ms. Spear. Oh, it's been moved by Mr. Brandstetter, seconded by Mr. Bulkey. Ms. Spear, has there been any staff analysis of this?
There have been staff analysis, and this is where there was an assumption, or an estimate, I should say, that about 1,770 properties would be affected, and in effect, through this language change, they would become non-conforming dwelling units within these two zones, Air Corridor 1 and 2. There's been no notification to these property owners, so that I think would be of some concern. The other issue here is that should they become non-conforming uses, there is the practical effect that has on sale of property, valuation of property, the ability to secure insurance, and all of those things. Again, there's been no public discussion about this before this evening.
So
there's no firm recommendation, yes or no, from staff?
Without this language, wouldn't they be non-conforming when we change the zoning to clear zone zoning?
Within the clear zone, that is a slightly different treatment of property than in Air Corridor 1 and 2. Clear zone does not have any residential properties as it stands. This analysis that you see in front of you with those 1,700 plus, that's only Air Corridor 1 and 2. So if the language were to change in clear zone, that would affect some of the remaining existing businesses there, which are already planned. I know the council, I think, is aware to be purchased over time, bought out to clear that, literally clear it out. Air Corridor 1 and 2, there are no such plans. So it's a slightly different nuance between B1, which relates specifically to clear zone, and then C and D1, which are Air Corridor 1 and 2.
Discussion, Mr. Brandstetter?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of this amendment is, as staff has said, is to bring these three zoning districts where there are uses that we do not wish to have, but rather than say if there's something that we don't wish to have in the long term that's there, give it status as a primary authorized use and thus not be subject to the provisions of the code that non-conforming uses in every other zoning district of the city comply with. And I understand, you know, generally our code for non-conforming uses has some limits about that a use is no longer authorized even though it was grandfathered as non-conforming, if there's a period of time of where it ceases to be used for that purpose. And there are limits as to how much repair, addition, maintenance can be done on it as relates to the value of the property. That to take an area that, like the clear zone, for example, that really we're trying aggressively to seek funding to move all of those existing uses out, to maintain them as conforming uses with full permission within our code for people to update them, add to them, and do that, is just inconsistent with our actions. And the same is true is to take an area of the other two zones and say everything that's there is not just grandfathered, but is now given a higher status of being a primary authorized use. And we don't do that in any of the other zoning districts of the city. We have grandfathered non-conforming uses all over the city, but we don't grant this type of protection of saying, you're not just grandfathered, you're a primary authorized use and you're not non-conforming. And this would just sort of bring these sorts of uses in line with the same way that we treat similar uses that are not the primary ones that are in a code with everyone else. Now, I understand that the staff says, well, but that makes a lot of residential properties non-conforming. I recall a recent action that the council took of where we had an elementary school, and we were very specific of saying we didn't want residential land there. We talked about some other things of where our vision of the future of this is that some existing residential parcels will be consolidated by someone and converted to industrial, commercial type uses to be able to go and do that. That consistently applying the code for non-conforming uses doesn't tell anybody they have to move out, doesn't do anything because our code still grandfathers non-conforming uses to be able to go and do that. But it does create the level playing field and the potential, particularly if uses are ceased to be actively engaged on a property, for that property to then be engaged. Would hope that may well serve as an incentive for someone to look to try to consolidate some parcels and create a primary permitted use, and that is further on down in one of the other paragraphs.
Any other comments on the proposed amendment? Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to see if I understand this correctly. Everything that I heard from my colleague is correct, except for one thing. How many of these people know this is going to happen tonight?
Yeah.
And I have a problem with that. I was telling someone last week that every time I put on this jacket to sit at this dais, I have to put aside what I want. And then I represent 59,000 people, some of whom live there. I don't think it's right, even though I agree with the property angle of your argument, when we start to talk about people who are not being informed of this action, I think we are acting contrary to what we have also said on this dais. So I'm not in favor of these amendments, even though I will acknowledge the validity of them as far as they go. It's when you run into people that I have, then I base my objection. Thank you.
I think I'd just add to that. I was approached by one of the owners in that area informally at a social event probably a couple months ago, and was asked if any changes were in store for the zoning of the clear zone area, or what about eminent domain? I said there had been no consideration of eminent domain. We were doing some free market purchases, and there wasn't any zoning change on the horizon. I mean, that was currently proposed. And so I agree with the idea that these all should be non-conforming. But I think people need to have their input so we don't create a problem that doesn't exist now or create potential liability that I don't know about by inadvertently downzoning and creating an inverse condemnation issue. I just don't know if that exists. And so I'm reluctantly opposed to this because I want the outcome, but I think there needs to be more process, and I'm not a process guy.
If I could, Mr. Mayor, please remember too, Council, that 18A will have significant effect on the military district areas as well. So this issue will be in front of you again, and the opportunity to have public notice and conversation about this topic could occur in your 18A conversations either later this year or however they work out time-wise.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Mr. Polke?
Yeah, and I too, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too worry about the notification issue. I'm just not sure that even if we could legally do it, which I'm not sure we could, I think it would be under some amount of challenge. It would be it would be an on goal, right? We would do this knowingly that somebody would challenge it, and rightly so, because they would be mad. I mean, I'm with my colleagues, although I think we're going to have to work on this going forward because I think we need to be a little more nuanced. It seems like from what I'm reading, we're pretty nuanced on the difference between the clear zone and the air corridor, but I think we also need to start getting nuanced on what can go in the Air Corridor 1 and the Air Corridor 2, which is farther away. I think we agree that there shouldn't be any schools there. But I think when we get into 18A, we're going to have to really discuss. There are some fairly, there's a fair number of people living in that Air Corridor 1, which is awfully close to the landing area. Parts of Air Corridor 2, granted, it's in the Air Corridor, and I think that's what we're going to have some discussions around, and I would really like to see where staff and the Planning Commission come in on that. Are these really just two of the same areas with different names, or are they two areas that we're actually going to treat a little bit different? And what would those differences be? I mean, especially, I guess, if our goal is that it become an area of open space and businesses, you clearly would want lower impact businesses on one side, but what is, a little bit more higher employee density to the north of that, but what would that be? And I don't have my head around that. For as much as we've discussed it, I don't have my head around that. So I look forward to a continued conversation in that regard.
Okay, I'll call for the question on Mr. Whalen.
How would the proposal from Mr. Branstetter be consistent with the JLU's recommendations?
In terms of the policy, the principle behind military compatibility is really what I would answer you off the top of my head, sir.
So it'd be consistent with it?
The joint land use study is very much about compatibility in terms of land use close to, adjacent to, proximate to the operations as well as the base boundaries itself. So the clear zone, the air corridors 1 and 2 all are affected and mentioned in the JLUS as well as the ACUS study.
So if we were to wait for consideration until after the 18A development discussion, review, and approval is done, Yeah, it's possible during that time frame that there could be further residential development in these two areas.
Theoretically possible, they're pretty built out. The number of units that might be built in that amount of time are probably pretty small.
So unlikely then.
Very unlikely, given the density requirements per acre in those zones. I do not see or anticipate any residential uses because of those underlying requirements,
Other than the continuation of those uses.
other than the continuation of existing uses. And just as a point of clarification too for the council, the J-Luce is just that. It's a series of recommendations.
Right.
The Department of Defense gives you the authority for actually making the requirements, developing the regulations.
Ready to call for the question on the motion to amend 18.30.730 by the addition of language proposed by Mr. Branstetter. All in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay.
Nay.
The amendment fails. We now move to the consideration of the amended motion. And I'm not going to run through it all. But we've adopted. Is there any further discussion?
What are we doing with number? Pardon? 1 or 2, the one on Bridgeport, what are we doing with that one? So.
Mr. Whalen, or Mr. Mayor, if I could, the vote was already to leave 2019-02 as written in the proposed ordinance, so as the applicant requested.
Okay.
Any further discussion on the amended motion? Mr. Branstetter.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I would just note that as we have worked through this, that the ordinance is structured to not only make changes in the comprehensive plan and our zoning maps, but there were also sections that were changes to 18A, and that changes to 18A are not necessarily having us to wait a year for anybody to reconsider that, since 18A is actually gearing up to be reviewed and rewritten later in this month, to be able to go and do that. I think it was appropriate that we had the 3 sections of the comp plan where we really did do some clarifying of policy around the public institutional district within economic development and within military lands, to be able to go and do that, of where we've created, I think, a clearer understanding of the city's both combination of vision and how we, most importantly, how we want the hearing examiner to understand what our intent is in terms of when it says something is consistent with the comprehensive plan, that he knows where we're going. So, I think that we've, worked through, and also we've been assisted by the Planning Commission that has done a lot of work on this in terms of sorting us out and dealing with that. So I'm going to be happy to vote in favor of this.
Any other discussion? All in favor of ordinance number 714 as amended, amendments to the Lakewood Comprehensive Plan, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. We now move to, thank you, Ms. Spear and staff. I know this is a tremendous amount of work. Then we go and paint on your Picasso. So. We now move to unfinished business. Is there any unfinished business?
No unfinished business.
Any new business to come before the council?
And no new business.
So reports by the city manager, Ms. Kraus.
Okay, so the first one is on the NTSB Amtrak. So the City of Tacoma's resolution in support of the safety recommendations approved by the NTSB as a result of the investigation of the Amtrak is scheduled for their July 16th council meeting. So if that should pass, their mayor would get in touch with our mayor.
And I received a correspondence from Mayor Woodards indicating that while she could not guarantee passage, she didn't see any problem with their approval of the resolution.
The second item is regarding the Tide Flats Sub-Area Plan Advisory Group. The City of Tacoma and the Tide Flats Steering Committee invited the City of Lakewood to participate on the Tide Flats Sub-Area Advisory Group. If the city accepts this invitation, we will need to designate a representative and an alternate to participate as a member of the TAG. So the due date to respond for this is by August 30th, and the first meeting will be held this fall. And the TAG is expected to meet on a monthly basis for the duration of the draft plan review development phase and as needed during the city's adoption. So the question for the City Council is the City Council ready to make a decision on whether to accept or decline the invitation? And if the answer is yes, is the City Council ready to designate a representative and an alternate? The appointee information is due by August 30th, so we still have some time, but unless the City Council has an answer for today.
I could perhaps explain this a little more. So the City of Tacoma has embarked on a consideration of a sub-area plan for the port, which has a tremendous impact on the economics of the region. With respect to the military, it also has a big impact on its fuel source for McCord at U.S. Oil and the pipeline. There are advocates who, very frankly, are opposed to any development, anything to do with fossil fuels, and would like to see industrial property in the port remediated to Tide Flats. They allied the Puyallup tribe. The port has to be part of the process because of state statute. They have a legal right, it's limited, but it's Tacoma's planning process with a legal right held by the port to have some input. The City Council of Tacoma brought in the tribe. The port brought in the county to try to create some numerical balance, and it's a cluster, which is a grouping. Right. This committee would be a broader-based advisory committee to the steering committee and meet less frequently, but I initially was inclined to say, what's in it for Lakewood and should we participate? I did a little more investigation, and our presence is requested for numerical balance, philosophical balance to the process. So when this new greater committee is formed, very frankly, they want some adults in the room. And so that's why when you have the tribe-appointed wildlife representative, you may want somebody from the Tacoma-Pierce County Economic Development Board. Mm-hmm. We are requested to participate for philosophical and geographic balance. Mm-hmm. So it would be my recommendation that we do participate, and it can't be me. Can't be me.
Depending on the meeting time, I could do it because of my crossover roles. BDB.
Yeah. Is it a? Is it? Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is it an elected official level or is it a staff level?
It could be a staff level.
Okay.
And maybe the way we do that is appoint an elected official with a staff alternate.
Right. But as a body, we need to kind of give the marching orders.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to play the devil's advocate, given what we know of the area's politics, and say one of us is on that board, just how effective are we going to be? Because as soon as I heard The city of Tacoma brings in the tribe. That's 4 aces in their hand right now. And if we're trying to balance this, I'm beginning to think that maybe we're going to be frustrated, but we're not going to get the balance you're looking for.
This whole process in some ways is a blocking move by the port. Tacoma has to take an initiative by a majority of its city council to do, and overcome any legal rights the port has to make a meaningful change. So what is actually happening is it may be discussed to death, or at least till there's some changeover of the minority that's pushing this from the Tacoma City Council.
Did you say 2 would be appointed on primary and an alternate, or staff?
Yeah.
Yeah, we think about this.
I think we just give them the nod that we will.
Yeah, I think we
right,
say we
okay.
will participate and
All
worry about appointing later.
All right.
Mr. Brantz,
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I certainly concur that we should participate. This isn't an issue that just emerged. It's something that's been going on for more than a year. There was a series of interim regulations done, and I do think that we were an entity along with a number of others that provided input at the time. The interim regulations were looking to interfere with the expansion of the fuel capability in the port to be able to go and do that, and that we were one of the voices that was successful in that not being included in the interim regulations, and it not being included in the interim regulations a second time when the interim regulations were extended. So I don't think that it's a pointless effort to be able to have your voice in there. I also think that there's not unanimity on this is not the majority of the Tacoma City Council trying to find a way to do something. It's and so to those that we support those and provide some backup to the folks on that council that have our view of the economic value and the types of value the port should provide. Is something that we were going to do. Having gone and testified at the public hearings on those interim regulations, you are far outnumbered by the anti-fossil fuel group who all just quoted each other, whereas a more sane group of people that brought individual succinct arguments in that period of time carried the day. And I think we should be on that side of that argument.
right? So let's see. Where'd the email come from to begin with? Yeah, it was I'll respond to Mayor Woodard's and tell her we will participate. So if you could draft that's the way it originally came, it was a letter from her to me requesting our participation. So if you could draft a letter back to Mayor Woodard's that we will participate, appointments of representatives to follow, that'd be great. Thanks. So anything else?
Okay, so the third item I have is the upcoming events. Tomorrow at 6 p.m., we have the farewell dinner with the Gimhe delegation at the Tacoma Golf and Country Club. On July 18th at 10 a.m., the 42nd Military Police Change of Command from Colonel Russell Tuddy will relinquish to Colonel Omar Lomas at Watkins Field in JBLM. On July 18th at 7:30 p.m., we have the summer concert series, starting with the 313th Army Band at Fort Steilacoom Park Pavilion. And then on July 19th at 10 a.m., we have a change of command ceremony for Colonel Nicole Lucas to Colonel Sky Duncan, also at Watkins Field JBLM. And then finally, on July 24th, which is a Wednesday, we have the second quarter employee recognition event at Fort Steilacoom Park, starting at 12 p.m. And that concludes my report.
Any questions from Ms. Kraus? I would note that the 313th Army Band is the substitute band as the I-Corps Band or First Corps Band goes on block leave this summer, and they are from Councilmember Bulkey's old stomping grounds in Huntsville, Alabama. They're happy to be up here when it isn't raining. But the humidity's down anyway. Even when it's raining, the humidity's lower.
Who's going to the dinner tomorrow night?
I am. I signed.
The list for the dinner tomorrow night, who's on there?
Who? Who's going tomorrow?
We have Councilmember Whalen, we have Mayor Anderson, we have Councilmember Simpson, Councilmember Brandstetter, and Councilmember Boki.
You blew us off. Okay. Councilmember comments. Ms. Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's good to be back. I had a lot of fun, but it was hot. 89 degrees at 9 o'clock in the morning, the humidity registered 90-something. It was scorching, but I had a good time. Just a little bit on the Summerfest, we had our Multicultural Coalition stand out there, and we got some good reviews for the few people that did come by our booth. We were kind of hidden, which was a hindrance, but it was great. Everybody that talked about it said it was wonderful, and we really enjoyed it. So that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Boki.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I too had a wonderful time at Summerfest. Looks like the triathlon did real well, and just really a neat event. And I had somebody point out to me, it's one of the few things you can actually show up where there's a lot of things going on and it's free, right? You don't have to necessarily spend money. You don't have to spend money to get in. You don't have to spend money to park. You can just bring the whole family and kind of go from there. And thought it went very well. I know there's some issues that are going to come up, but I think we'll work through them. We do have a PCRC meeting on Thursday night at 6. I cannot make it. It seems like everything's going on. There is one vote that's going to be taken on centers. I don't know that it's a contentious issue or not.
It'd be nice to have John, because I'm like triple booked as well, or quadruple booked.
And that's all I have, Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Brandstetter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, the city and the Sister Cities Association have been going through, either leading up to Summerfest and during and afters, hosting guests from Okinawa City, Boong in the Philippines, and Gimhae, with the last part of this being the farewell dinner for the Gimhae folks tomorrow. You know, each of those groups came to us not just to come and celebrate Summerfest with it, but came here with ideas about how we can better relate to each other and do more in a relationship. And so I think that's been the best year for those sorts of relationships in some time, where we've had people to go through and do that. The other thing, Mr. Mayor, is that, you know, I am in receipt of the city manager's evaluation to us. Was wondering if you had decided on a timeline for us to work on that process.
We've had a number of absences here. I was going to try to get a survey of when everybody's going to be here.
I don't know. Is Ms. Barth due to return next week?
Yes.
Yeah, so maybe we could have an initial discussion.
We do have a fifth Monday on the 29th if you wanted to. A quick one with, food. Pizza around the table.
I think that would be, if,
Let's see.
a good idea, Mary. I knew it. Yeah, I am too. Look how long we let this thing go last year. They would have to just get on and get it done.
Sometimes forget to show up anyways.
So why don't we have a short executive session next week and take on a deeper discussion on the 29th, if needed? I think we will.
Yeah, okay.
But unless we decide on the 22nd that we only need another short executive session and can
Right.
forego the meeting.
How thick is how thick is the study session next week? Do we know what's on it?
For the July 22nd study session, we have the I-5 JBLM Thorn Lane Connector Project update. We also have review of the second quarter police report, municipal court contract update, and review of the Park Code 8.76 update.
So it's not too bad.
Keep gutting the Thorn Lane connector, that'll be short.
Yeah.
I didn't see it.
Well, yeah, they're still building.
Right? So where was I? Mr. Simpson?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What was I going to say? Oh, yes. I was at the meeting this morning with the officials from GIMHAY. I enjoyed that. It was a very, I liked the way the meeting was conducted. We got right to business, got through that memorandum very quickly, and I thought it was very productive. There is one thing that I would like to suggest, not necessarily to this body, but just to let you know where my thinking was going on that. And I think I'm going to bring this up to the committee that does this. I don't understand why Clover Park Technical College isn't included as one of the educational facilities here in the city. It's particularly after the one gentleman talked about GIMHAY's automotive connection, and that suggests to me solid blue-collar worker, family wage kind of jobs, and I would like to see Clover Park Technical College become a part of this. I don't know if it's that maybe they haven't been asked or they don't want to, but I do want to let you know that I was thinking about saying something to that chair about bringing them into the discussion. It was their GIMHAY mutual exchange meeting this morning, and Pierce College was talked about. But if I'm not mistaken, the majority of people in the city of Lakewood who are of age do not have a college degree. They are blue-collar workers. And why not have the largest institution that does that kind of work at the table as well? The other thing I learned this morning at that meeting, which I did not know, is that the man to my right and the man to my left were born in 500 AD. And with that, Mr. Mayor, I will be quiet. And these two guys are talking.
No, I'm 505 and he's 495.
There you go. There's a 10-year delta there.
What Mr. Simpson was referring to is that what we learned is that GIMHAY is in an area where there are a lot of, like we have a lot of airplane manufacturing subcontractors scattered around the South Sound. GIMHAY is in the same kind of area with respect to Korea's automotive industry. There's a GM plant located very closely, and then there are some other that provide parts for Kia and Hyundai. So very similar to the Boeing supply chain. Mr. Whalen. Great.
Thank you very much. I, like many of you, attended the Sister City connectivity events, including the dinner last week, and I look forward to the one this week. The Summerfest was a fabulous event. I volunteered for the triathlon, and it was posted at one of the race locations, kind of directing people to go that way or whatever way they were supposed to go, and I think most of them got to the right spot. But the feedback we received from the race, as well as many of the events at Summerfest, was really quite great. And I don't know what the tentative numbers reporting back are, but I would think that it was even larger than last year. So if we were estimating 40-some-odd thousand last year, I'm sure it was north of that. The one consistent comment you will hear from people, in addition to, you know, great job, Lakewood, is, hey, how about looking at the traffic thing a little bit better next year? And one thought I would throw out there, as we're impacting and improving Angle Lane, it does somewhat interface with Silicon Boulevard pretty close to that lighted intersection. It might not be a bad idea to take a look at that and how we might at least provide an opening for occasional use for events like this, so you have some better circulation, as long as we're doing something to that road, because it's right there. There's a light right there. It wouldn't take a whole lot of planning and doing a curb cut to bring vehicles in or out, depending on, you know, the traffic engineering minds that we can bring into it, because that would, I think, accommodate a lot of stuff. So worth looking at on that. In terms of the Colonial Center Plaza, I met with Courtney from the city manager's office and one of our engineering staff members with the artist Perry Howard on site. She wanted to do a site visit. We talked a little bit about infrastructure and next steps, and so that will be communicated. I think Mr. Simpson indicated an interest to being on this subcommittee. There will be 2 members from the Arts Commission and likely a business owner, perhaps the owner or manager at the Best Western, be on the subcommittee group to kind of flesh through some further design stuff. They're going to verify, they meaning the city staff will verify what's in the ground right now, because when we went out there, the art site is all completely landscaped over. So the theory about the basin that's in place there for the water feature, we are not sure. So they're going to take a look at that and see what truly is in the dirt there. And then we'll come back with recommendations. I got an email from a local business guy today about the trip mitigation fee and how its application may be creating some unintended consequences. And this is a situation, you got the email. It was a existing building, kind of a new tenant of an existing building with a little bit of an increased use. And the result of going through the process of filling out the trip mitigation fee report or application was that this gentleman was going to pay like $21,000 to expand a daycare facility for about 8 students, which of course tanks the opportunity to get a revitalized business in that location. I don't know all the facts. Staff did a nice job of reporting back on the information, again, circulated to all of us, but it would be good to kind of revisit that and how that impacts. I was of the impression it was for new construction within the Central Business District, as opposed to our efforts to fill vacant facilities with new tenants. And so if new tenants of vacant facilities are getting hammered with trip mitigation fees to that extent, we're never going to fill those vacant buildings. So I think it's something we should just get educated about and take a look at. Again, the problem with unintended consequences sometimes is something we need to watch out for. So other than that, it should be a busy week. I wanted to thank Ms. Moss for coming back from her trip. She brought some gifts, I think, from her high school reunion. I didn't know if that was from the 3rd or 4th dynasty that was on the table there, Ms. Moss, or was that? Okay, yeah.
Is that BC or AD you're talking about here?
That's all I have. Thank you. We appreciate your return. It's good to see you.
Yeah, I echo the accolades with respect to Summerfest. It was a wonderful event once you got there. Traffic does remain a problem. I think that's the thing we have to iron out. I'm going to go dig for the U.S. Open parking plan, and I think the key there was they had 2 entrances, neither of which required you to go into the interior of the park to access a parking spot.
We had the one off Silicon Boulevard.
Well, you could come in off Silicon Boulevard, and you could come in off Angle Lane, and get in if you're
well, that's what I meant. Silicon Boulevard into Angle Lane. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's we may need a temporary culvert and a bridge over, essentially a bridge over the ditch on Elwood or something. Pardon? Well, yeah, they were using it immediately instead of routing it from inside out. They were just, and it's like, if you remember if you've ever used University of Washington, I hate to use that term, football parking, where they stack, you don't have to stack, but what they do is they bring a stream of cars in one lane. They don't merge people together, so you have to stop, and they just peel off.
They could do the bus thing like they did for the open though, and bring them in that little angle lane thing and
Could,
drop
you
people
could
off.
bring buses in, but I don't think, I really don't think you have to make a major
Yeah.
improvement. It just,
College parking, make them work.
I think our friends at JBLM Engineering could create a temporary bridge for us. We might be able to wrangle a permit from Mr. Buer.
I don't even think there's a bridge there. I
What?
think where that light is, I don't think there's any need for a bridge or ditching.
There was from the back.
Is there?
So instead of going all the way down Angle Lane and curling back,
Yeah.
you came in and you bridged over the ditch and went right into the field.
Oh.
And so it was a lot quicker.
Yeah.
That being said, we have one more Sister City event. I think that has gone swimmingly, and making new friends and influencing people when we give them a ride. So if there isn't any future or additional things to come before us, we're adjourned. Right.
So like